The fight to overturn Prop 50 continues in court, and will it go to the Supreme Court? We have a special guest tonight, Assemblyman David Tangipa, who will be going through that, as well as discussions about fraud, waste, and abuse going on in Sacramento. We know all about fraud, waste, and abuse here on this program. On tonight's episode of California Underground, starting right now. What's going on, everybody? Thanks for tuning into another episode of the California Underground. I am your host, Phil. We have a great show and a great guest tonight, so I'm not going to delay anymore. I'm going to bring in my trusty co-host, the best, the fastest researcher in the West, as well as our special guest, Assemblyman David Tangipa, who has been on the forefront of the fight for Prop 50. But first, David, welcome to the program. How are you?
I'm doing well, and I give you an A on how to say my last name. So it's something that quite a few others have difficulty with, even though I don't think it's that bad.
Right before we hop on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
it's better than how I thought it was pronounced. I mean, I'm not even going to say how I thought it was pronounced, so I'm glad I asked you. But for our listeners, why don't you take a minute, introduce yourself, who you are. We know you're an assemblyman, how you got there, stuff like that, and then we'll jump into some conversation.
yeah, well, thank you for having me. Again, as you had stated, I am the assemblyman for the 8th District, which is Northeast Fresno County, Eastern Madera County, Mariposa, Tuolumne, Calaveras, Mono, and Inyo. And I recently got elected. I'm in my freshman year, but I was born and raised in Sacramento. My mother immigrated here from the island of Tonga. My father was an old Navy guy. We've all heard those stories about the Navy guy finds an island girl, has a secret family. Punchline to that joke is David Tangipa. I am the product of a secret family. I grew up in North Highlands, and for me, a lot of people know about Polynesian people is that they're fairly large, and the only way to get out of North Highlands really is you're either rapping, you're selling drugs, or you're playing sports. And by the time I got into the 6th grade, I was already 6 foot tall. So sports was a little bit of my default, and I had the chance to go play football at Fresno State. While I was there, I studied political science and criminology. I graduated early. I got my master's in business. I started working in real estate and real estate developing. And then I also started working for the Fresno County Board of Supervisors. Politics is something that I've always been passionate about because I've always believed that policy is the best way you could change people's lives, whether it's for the better or the worse, just depends on who's making it. And I see the state of affairs that California has been in. We see who has been in charge of this state for a long time. And I wanted to get involved. So I started working on campaigns, elections, data analytics for the Central Valley. Then there was an opportunity to run for the state assembly and throw my hat into the ring, get a little bit dirty and dusty, and play in the arena because I think California is worth fighting for. This place has changed my life, where I believe I've lived the American dream, and we're going through the California nightmare. And the only way to change it is by being in Sacramento.
Well, I applaud you because I think the way you fix things in California is you actually have to go to the assembly and the legislature here and fix things. No offense meant to those who go off to Congress and stuff like that, but I think you have to fight here in California, and I think it's great to see a good group of younger conservatives in Sacramento who are pushing back and making your voices heard. But the reason we have you on tonight is because you've been on the forefront of what's happening in this lawsuit, this litigation. You and I have talked about it, this recent order or ruling that came down about Prop 50. So why don't you tell viewers a little bit about what this Prop 50 lawsuit's about? Like, what's the argument? You can explain that. We'll talk about it.
Well, we know that Prop 50 is the gerrymandering. The state of California has claimed that it is to combat the gerrymandering that happened in Texas. And I get this question often on what's the general difference between the two. Well, California has a racially gerrymandered map where the map maker used race to justify how he decided to draw the lines in an effort to placate to Latinos in the state of California. That is different than the map makers in Texas, because Texas, the legislative body, is the map makers. And so they, for just political reasons, were able to change their maps. They had some challenges there, but those challenges lost actually in the Supreme Court because of their political nature. What we're seeing in California is we're using the words that the map maker actually used himself when he can go on podcast and tell people that I created a Latino majority district as the first thing that I did when creating these maps. Well, he is telling us right there that he used race to justify these lines. When he's going on the news to say that he expects the Latinos to see a general benefit in the Central Valley, it makes sense to me that it was his intention to use race for a minority group to benefit from. And so what we've challenged them on is his racially gerrymandered maps, his language that he has actually talked about when it comes to the creation of these maps, and how in the state of California, the VRA really wasn't supposed to be used this way. The Voter Rights Act was supposed to remedy racist and systemic racism of the past. Well, if you think about the state of California, if you're making a district for Latinos, you're actually making a district for the largest ethnic group in the state of California. They make up a very large demographic in the legislative body. And the way that Paul Mitchell drew the maps benefits a group that doesn't have any systemic barriers against them, that doesn't have any issues of getting into elected office. I'm a main plaintiff on this case because I'm Polynesian. I'm actually the first Polynesian ever elected to the state legislature here in California. And by the way he drew these maps is actually detrimental to other minority groups. So we've challenged them on a lot of those grounds, actually utilizing their tools against them. And my hope is in the future that race doesn't play a factor in how we draw maps. But with the language that the map maker has decided to use, we're very excited for where the Supreme Court is taking this. The state has barely 24 hours left to respond to our emergency injunction.
Yeah, as I understood it, and I did a video looking at the ruling, racially drawn gerrymandered maps are facially unconstitutional, full stop. That's the end of the story. Like that was your guys' argument. And I was like, okay, yeah. And I mean, you have Paul Mitchell, who is the individual in question. He's the guy who was running around running his mouth about, oh, we drew these Latino maps and we increased representation and not being very secretive about his intent. And then it was also crazy that right before you guys had this little trial, Paul just didn't show up and they prevented you guys from even deposing Paul Mitchell. And he's like the star witness of the whole case. So it's crazy that they went ahead without even hearing from Paul Mitchell.
You're exactly right. Paul Mitchell claimed legislative intent, and he's not a legislator. They actually even submitted documents to show that Paul Mitchell was just a private contractor. And he invoked this privilege, which really doesn't exist, over 100 times. It's one of the things that we wanted to ask him if he would have just participated with the trial is, Paul, when you say that the first thing you did was draw a Latino majority district, did you consider race as a predominant factor in that sentence? I mean, his clear answer would have to be yes, since he's talking about the racial demographic, and it was the first thing he did. The next question would have been also to Paul Mitchell was, when you expect Latinos and Asian groups to see a general benefit in these new maps that you created, were you talking about race? He would again have to say yes. And if he would have said yes to both of those, it would have been very clear to the judges that racial intent was the predominant factor for how he drew the lines in California. And this is actually what gave us a case, is that Paul Mitchell ran around bragging how he was the map maker because he wanted everybody to know that he was part of this fight. this really is an issue because he couldn't keep his mouth shut.
You kind of segued into what my next question is. You're obviously extremely brilliant. I don't think that you're a lawyer, but you seem to have a lot of legal knowledge. And then Phil here is a lawyer. I'm not, and I don't think that most of our audience is. So there have been a few lawsuits regarding this issue, regarding Prop 50. Some were immediately just shut down or thrown out, if I'm not mistaken. So this question is kind of for both of you. Do you mind not getting too into the weeds, but breaking down a couple of the lawsuits that California has already had? Because, like I said, I know some have been thrown out. And so just kind of to clear up, because we hear things, like someone will see a tweet, oh, Prop 50, nope, Prop 50 shut down. Gavin Newsom will brag about, we blocked it again, we blocked Trump, MAGA, whatever. So if you guys don't mind taking just a couple minutes to kind of like talk about the different lawsuits that were thrown out, and why this one's different, where we're at with it, to just to clarify like what's currently happening. If I hope I'm making sense with my question.
Yes, some of the
I mean, the only one that I know yeah, go ahead, David.
I just wanted to touch on it
than I do, so I only know.
Well, no, I
this
just
one,
want to. It's actually a very simple answer. Is a lot of the lawsuits were technically, what the courts are saying, filed too early. That injury has to occur first, and then you can sue. So that's pretty much what a lot of them were thrown out for, was that you're just too early on the lawsuit side. Some of those were also just filed in the courthouse. And so when it went all the way to the Supreme Court, pretty much the state Supreme Court threw it out because of their general interpretation. But remember, 3 of those were appointed by Governor Newsom anyways. So
yeah. This is the only one I know about. Well, this is the one that I've been keeping an eye on because I think it has the strongest argument to it. And when I read like everyone getting involved and I read their complaint, I said, this one has legs. Like this one has a good argument. Sometimes you can file a lawsuit for anything. Doesn't mean you're going to win. It just means you can file a lawsuit for it. But so you guys went through the process at the entry of the trial level. The court said, we're not giving you a preliminary injunction. You and I have talked about what a crazy ruling that was, that they just basically said, well, it was the voters' intent. If the voters voted for this, then that's all that matters. Doesn't matter if it's racially motivated. Who cares if it's a violation of the 14th Amendment? Who cares if Paul Mitchell didn't testify and we have all this evidence? It's the voter intent. So that was a 2-1 ruling. And you and I were talking about it. And I want to hear your thoughts about that ruling. To me, I was shaking my head and going, I can't believe this is what they came up with. But when I looked at their backgrounds, I was like, okay, I can believe this is why they came up with this ruling.
yeah, actually, it was crazy to kind of hear their argument that racial intentions could be washed away if the voters didn't think racially, but we could pass something as long as it was marketed to the voters that wasn't racist, then it washes the racial sins of the people who created it. And that's kind of what they argued, essentially, that the intent of the voters really usurps the map maker, really usurps the legislative body that had talked about a lot of the racial intent. I mean, one of my colleagues specifically said that this is about Latino families. This is about Black families. This is about the LGBTQ communities. This is about immigrant communities. And this is our way to fight back. That is pretty close to a direct statement from one of my colleagues. But because that was just a bill form of the Prop 50 map, and the general voters knew that they were voting against Donald Trump, that actually washes the sins of all other racial implications, which, I mean, essentially creates a crazy argument of, well, if I wanted to discriminate against somebody, as long as I marketed it as something else, I could get away with that if I put it to the voters. That's what they're saying, is as long as I market it as something that wasn't part of the original intent, then the voters knew what my actual goal was.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's kind of how I feel like most of it runs. Not to get too controversial here, but even abortion, it's like, well, we'll market it as it's not a baby, it's just a clump of cells. So getting rid of it, no big deal. Sorry,
Mm.
total side subject there, but
Well, we were talking about how it's, yeah, if you follow that logic of the court where it says, as long as the voters voted for it and as long as that's their intent, like what else can you get away with? And I believe the ruling also said something to the effect of like, well, who cares if the legislature or the people who pushed Prop 50 duped the voters into voting for it? It's still the voters' intent. Like that's what they voted for, which it was even more baffling to be like, well, even if the legislature or people who push it, even if you say it's because we're fighting Donald Trump and it's not what it's going to end up being, it doesn't matter. That's the voters' intent. So they've given carte blanche that as long as you deceive enough voters, you can basically get anything passed, whether it's constitutional or not here in California. I thought that was insane that they went there, right?
I thought it was extremely insane. And not only that, you look at what happened with Prop 8 back in 2008. The voters intended to constitutionalize traditional marriage into the California Constitution, and it passed. But that was actually challenged all the way up to the Supreme Court and was actually deemed unconstitutional. So we have seen ballot initiatives before actually be deemed unconstitutional regardless of the voters' intent. Um, Californians at that time
Mhm.
intended to just constitutionalize traditional marriage, but they saw that it provided discrimination. So the only way that I see that this really happened was very far reaching, and I agree with the dissent. And the dissent really just put it out there saying that how can you determine the intent of 11 million people who voted in this last election, and for us to have just a general sweeping ideology that they all participated, whether it was political or not political, that doesn't make any sense. And there's no way to somehow
Mhm.
determine what 11 million people are thinking. The other one that was interesting on the majority side of the argument was they kept talking about what I was saying or what somebody else was saying when the original and the key point of the argument is the map maker. The map maker in a lot of case law, in cases that have been determined for racial gerrymandering and gerrymandering of states, has always been the intent of the map maker. And when you hear arguments like Paul Mitchell and the ones that he made, it is very clear that race played a factor because you just need to listen to when he opens up his mouth.
Somebody asked in the chat, they said, I thought this was done, which is a perfect segue to you giving us an update of like, where is this lawsuit right now that there was this ruling denying the preliminary injunction?
Yes, so we have appealed all the way to the Supreme Court. And actually, by the end of day tomorrow, Governor Newsom and Attorney General Rob Bonta have to respond to our emergency, our emergency injunction. So they have less than 24 hours to make sure that they get the response. So no, this is not done just yet. We are fighting all the way to the Supreme Court. We believe that we have really good arguments. The Department of Justice is also signed on or has also signed on to our lawsuit. So they have filed their support arguments for why we are challenging the racially gerrymandered maps. And it is not over yet. It's not over yet until we hear back from the Supreme Court. So there is still a chance that we actually stop the implementation of the Prop 50 maps. There's a chance that they revert back to the 2021 redistrict maps. And we've actually made that commitment to everybody that we will fight this all the way till the end. I have been through the map making process. I went through the elections committee, the appropriations committee, and even on the floor. And I talked about how a lot of these people were lying to us and lying and putting this out to lie to the voters. That is despicable to me. So I wanted to make sure that I fought this every single step of the way. We need to make sure that we're fighting. There are no easy wins when it comes to us getting into office, and we're going to hold everybody accountable.
One thing that I have an issue with, and we've talked about this a lot, we had a whole show about bunch of people came on, we were talking about why we all said no on Prop 50, is I'm just not comfortable with the idea of every time a party doesn't like the results of elections, and in 2024 we saw California go more red, that you can just change your mind and go, well, we're going to redistrict. That's it. We're just going to change the playing field. And to me, that just feels like you're taking the whole representation, democratic element, and you're taking the voice of the people away. Because what does it matter if my representative can be changed out every couple of years because you're not happy with Texas or you're not happy with Trump? Like, that's not how it was set up. It wasn't set up so that every 2 years we can just change what the districts are. What are your thoughts on like the bigger overall implication of something like Prop 50?
Well, what I really thought of was California had the gold standard when it comes to the Independent Redistricting Committee and the commission, which created the maps here and actually prevented us from making sure that politics and partisanship on the political side was the main factor. We were supposed to make sure that we were prioritizing the people, not the politicians. And what Prop 50 has done is really just strip people away from proper representation. It really diminishes the rural voices, and I represent a very rural district. And so I believe that
Mhm.
if you're in Shasta County, you are just as Californian as LA County. If you're in Mono County, you are just as Californian as San Francisco. If you're in Redding, you're just as Californian as San Diego. And our goal, and what my main goal is, I wish we would have more competitive districts. I wish we could actually make politicians work for us, because when I was not in political office and just working, I just wanted to know the person that was elected to represent me was fighting for me. And I think that there's this level of complacency, both on Republicans and Democrats' side, that aren't that isn't beneficial to the general people. Like I said, I grew up in very low income Section 8 housing in Sacramento. I used to be one of those weird kids who used to love reading about the president and go down, and my mom would just walk us around the Capitol and we would ride public transportation down there. And I used to glorify the building. Now that I've been in the building, there are two things that I have learned. One, math is subjective. And two, doing the right thing isn't good enough to get things done. And I would prefer to change that because the people of California deserve better. If we're the richest state in the richest country in the history of the world, and we're suffering as bad as we are suffering today, when are we going to finally look at our state leadership and those who are elected to represent us and say it's their fault and we demand better? And that's what I want to do.
Um, Perfect segue. We got a couple minutes left with you before you have to read probably about 3,000 bills because that's California. They love to jam as many bills down your throat as possible. You were recently talking to Ashley Zavala about like fraud, waste, and abuse. And here in California, we're seeing like horrible fraud, waste, and abuse. We just saw the arrest of the CEO of a nonprofit down in LA for $23 million. There's been a ton of fraud in LA going on, but it's just overall the homeless spending, high speed rail, all of that stuff. Tell us your thoughts about it and what you want to do to try and combat what's going on in Sacramento wasting our tax dollars.
I believe we need a California Tea Party. I really do, because the amount of money that we have in California, the amount of tax revenue that we've collected, is insane. It's just the easiest way to describe it. It is absolutely insane. Our budget is right around $350 billion. That is more than most countries. And since
Mhm.
2018 to where we're at today, our budget has almost increased in spending by 100%. But when I'd ask anybody, where did all of that money go? Nobody feels like their quality of life has increased 100%. Actually, things have gotten worse. The conditions of our roads, our infrastructure, our ability to get through permitting, planning, services from our government, all of it has gotten worse. And yet our budget grows. And so does our tax bill, our utility bills, our grocery bills. That doesn't make sense unless there is fraud, waste, and abuse. abusing us, the taxpayers, using us as piggy banks to fund all of these projects that don't make any sense. I worked very hard on the high-speed rail project. I actually did part of the audit with Secretary Duffy's office that worked in coordination to retroactively stop the $4 billion that the federal administration was sending, because we were able to find out that almost $1 billion was paid out in a change order clause. I like to call it non-execution of contract. That means that we paid contractors almost $1 billion to do no work because California high-speed rail did not know where the easements and where the utility lines, canals, roads, or even have the right people on site with permitting and planning. And because they didn't have any of that prepared, they had to pay out the contractor $170,000 a day or $5 million a month. So we have essentially paid out about $1 billion with zero work to be done in essentially parking fees.
I had started going through some of that. And Phil, I sent you the information. I got overwhelmed, but I was going through a lot of like, where is this money going with the high speed rail? And I was seeing that there was these change orders that were costing millions of dollars per, like, simple little change orders, but they add up. 3 million here and 5 million here and a few 100,000 there. And I never got to anywhere close to even like half of $1 billion because I just got so overwhelmed with it. And I was like, this is disgusting. This is disturbing. All the while I'm looking at the salaries of who's on the high speed rail, like board or whatever. And they have these majorly inflated salaries for what I don't know. And I sent Phil a bunch of that information, but then I was like, I'm checked out. This is too much. This is too big. And I just stopped looking. I was like, this is a mess. It's a nightmare. It's California in a nutshell.
Somebody
Here's
asked
a
in the chat. Yeah, go ahead, David.
Sorry, there's a little bit of a delay. But here's a very shocking piece about high-speed rail that I've been able to share. High-speed rail right now is on track to be the third most expensive infrastructure project in the history of the world, adjusted for inflation. Number one is the interstate project of the 1950s. Number two is the International Space Station. Number three is California high-speed rail. And the main difference is I can drive on the I-5, the 99, and the I-80. And number two is you can go to outer space and there is a space station. We will never have a California high-speed rail with the current authority that's on charge of it today.
That's a great point. I'm going to remember that. That's a good point I'm going to keep making. Somebody said in the chat, with no California Republicans in office. Well, there are California Republicans in office, so it's not no Republicans. There's one of them talking to us right now, and there's more of them. Then how will the voice of California Republicans be heard? That's what somebody asked in the chat.
So I would just ask anybody to get involved. I mean, we just got elected this past year. There's a new group, as what I've heard from others, that they see some of the energy of we're trying to fight back, but we can't do that by ourselves. The largest Republican party in the United States is here in California. But a lot of Republicans also feel defeated, and I understand that. And it's why I wanted to make sure that if we were one of the people saying, where are our elected officials and what are they doing to fight for us? I want to tell everybody, I am in front of you right now asking for help because I cannot do this unless the almost 6 million Republicans also help us out. There are about 6 million independents out there as well, fed up with the people who are in charge of this state. And if you want to change this state, you can get involved with campaigns. We do not need any more keyboard warriors. I don't need any more California refugees. I need California rebels, people to run for office. There's about 40 offices right now in the state assembly that actually has no Republican running against the current member. We need people to file that. Carl DeMaio is a great vessel that has been helping us out and a colleague of mine. I have my work as well. We have work from the assemblywoman out of the Tulare area, and we need as many as we can to sign up and be involved. And so we're trying to give people some hope again that we're fighting. There's nothing else that I want than to fight for a better California.
Mm-hmm. And this is the point we constantly ad nauseum make here on the podcast is I think people, they always gravitate towards, yes, there's a big gubernatorial election coming up. That's a big deal. But so many of these assembly races and like legislative races in Sacramento are won by like razor thin margins. They're a lot of them are very close. So pay attention to these because state assemblies, senators, city council, stuff like that, that all makes a big difference. So pay attention to that. You know, it's not just, oh, let's get a governor in there, let's just get a Republican governor in there and everything will be fixed. It's like, no, no, you got to focus on the legislature. We need to break that super majority, right?
That is the number one goal, breaking the supermajority. And if we do that, that will automatically moderate the entire state of California. It actually doesn't matter if you have a Republican or Democrat governor when you have a supermajority, because they can roll, or they're a veto-proof majority will just usurp everything a governor would want to do. And if we're able to get just 7 more seats in the assembly, we will change that. If we're able to get 4 more seats in the Senate, we can change that. And there are enough competitive seats out there that we can actually break that. And I think the momentum is on our side, with people seeing how bad California is with the cost of living, the corruption issues, the unaffordability. So if we can now challenge that anger, excuse me, if we can challenge that anger and then point it at whose fault it is, and then motivate people to vote for their own policies and pocketbooks, we can change California.
Yeah. Well, we're believers here of changing California. So somebody, I know we got you for like a couple more minutes. Camille, I don't know if you had any more questions for the Assemblyman before we let him go.
What I wanted to real quickly touch on is because this current Prop 50 lawsuit with SCOTUS right now, but there's also the Louisiana. Is that the lawsuit? Like, so if this one, which hopefully this one does pass in our favor, is ruled in our favor, there's the other one that could still strike it down coming up. And I know we've talked about it before, so I didn't want to go into depth into that, but I just thought maybe briefly mention that, just because I feel like we come on here and we talk about like, woe is California, and I just want to there still could be good news, and there is good news. California, like David said, it's worth fighting for. California is such a wonderful state, and I don't want people to come on our show, like watch our show and be just frustrated and feel like, oh, there's something we can do. So there's still a second lawsuit with the Supreme Court that could rule in our favor for Prop 50, correct?
So first, I'll say California is the greatest asset on the history of Earth, and we just have some of the worst asset managers. So the best way to have an amazing asset, do really well, is to just change the asset managers. So it'd be very easy to get California back on track. And not only that, create abundance again. We just got to get away from the legislative scarcity. When it comes to that lawsuit that's actually in Louisiana, that's a challenge under the current structure of the Voter Rights Act and Section 2 of the Voter Rights Act, which allows racial gerrymandering. That is challenging that basis, because when the Voter Rights Act of 1965 was really put in place, it was to, again, right the wrongs of systemic racism and barriers that were created to actually hurt minority groups from being represented in political office. So there have been court cases that have challenged that time and time again, but have basically been stopped because they've shown that there were still ethnic barriers to getting proper representation. Now, in 2025, what we believe is that there are no racial barriers. When you have President Barack Obama make it to the president of the United States and win at such a large margin, there is no need to allow racial gerrymandering in VRA, they're called VRA districts, anymore. When you have a state like California, that's its largest ethnic group is a Latino group, and it's not a white group, then it is currently no longer necessary to allow Section 2 of the Voter Rights Act to grant these states the ability to racially gerrymander. Right now, we've got to get to a race neutral position and start making sure that we prioritize people for who they are, where they live, and why they should be blocked together, not through a racial lens. And if that lawsuit in Louisiana wins, I guess, then Section 2 of the Voter Rights Act will be thrown out, and essentially almost all maps in the entire United States will actually be deemed unconstitutional if they have a VRA element.
Wow.
Okay.
That's pretty
Thank
big.
you for the clarification.
Which is a
All
good
right.
which is a good thing, because then we won't use race anymore to justify blinds.
Two things before we let you go. First off, the chat is very excited about this idea of a California Tea Party. A lot of people say they're in. What can we do to help? And second, I know I joked about it's like 3,000 bills that you guys have to read, but what do you have an estimate of how many bills? Because we do a show on like looking at the new bills that are introduced around this time. So what are Camille and I in for in terms of reading bills to tell our audience?
Well, I think there's 2,600 is what we have. But tomorrow we're actually still voting on the carryover from the first year. So it's still carrying a couple bills over. Tomorrow's the last day actually for those last carryover bills. That's why it's so much. And I wish I actually had a bit more time to kind of describe that. But what I will tell everybody is to be prepared for a lot of what I refer to as anti-law enforcement. It's unfortunate that most of my colleagues prefer to fight against the federal administration instead of doing our job as state representatives. One of the big things we also have to watch out for is the massive loss of federal funds that are being pulled away from the state of California because we will not come into compliance with the law. We're about to lose out on $12 billion when it comes to SNAP because California can't get its fraud and error rate below 10%, all the way down to 6%. We have to be under that number or else we're going to lose our federal funds there. We have to remove all illegal immigrants from the Medi-Cal portion and make sure that no federal funds are being used for illegal immigrants. California is doing that, even though they tried to lie and gaslight people and tell them that it wasn't happening. I know it's happening because the Department of Finance and the Legislative Analyst's Office both told me that it was happening. We spend about $12 billion a year on that program. And what others that have to really watch out for is the governor's budget itself. The next 3 years we have predicted out show a deficit of in excess of $20 billion. So the Legislative Analyst's Office shows that our deficit's going to be around $35 billion year over year for the next 3 years. This is a massive issue. There has never been a time in California's history where we have 4 consecutive deficits in a row. Even in the Great Recession, we didn't have this many deficits. So if it's looking this bad in good years, we are not prepared for the bad years. And that is extremely irresponsible from their government and is where we really need to prioritize our goals. If we have a contraction in the market because about 42% of the state's revenue comes from capital gains, that is like gambling with a hand grenade. And if we have just a small depreciation in the general stock market, we will go from a $30 billion around that deficit to over $100 billion deficit. It is that detrimental, the state of affairs in California, that we need everybody to be paying attention to that.
Wow. There's a lot. Well, we're happy you're up there in Sacramento fighting for these principles and trying to cut down on all of that. I mean, that's a lot of irons in the fire between Prop 50, fraud, waste, and abuse. Where can people go and follow you and keep up with you and all the stuff that you're doing?
Well, there are a lot of irons, but California is worth fighting for. And like I said, I'm not going anywhere. I love this state. I love the people here. But they can always find me. It may be very hard to say my last name, but the easiest way I like to spell it is Tang IPA. I do have a campaign beer. You might not be able to say it, but you can at least drink it. But if you just look up that last name, Tangipa, Tangipa, you'll find me. It's only me and my family in California that have that last name. They can also make sure that they go to my legislative pages as well. So if they want to know what we're doing legislatively, what we're working on to take on insurance, utility costs, student loan debt. I had a big student loan debt bill trying to make it to where if you actually invest in yourself with higher education, including blue collar education, trades, you can actually have that as a full write-off. So it incentivizes people to invest in themselves. You know, if businesses get write-offs for their investments, I believe the people should get a write-off for theirs as well. That would really help the student loan debt crisis that is happening right now amongst younger people. So we want to incentivize people to better themselves. The best way we could do it is through creating conservative solutions for some liberal problems.
Like it. I like it. We need to have you back on to talk more about this. There's so much to talk about. So, David, thank you for coming on. As always, as we end every show, the best thing you can do that is you can support the show that is 100% free is share this with somebody else who is interested in California politics. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, review, all that stuff. And we'll see you on the next one. Later.
Thank you.